everyone. My name is Barbara MAJCHROWICZ. I represent Emigration Museum from Poland, Gdynia. Our museum was founded in 2012, and we wanted to make a place where we would describe all the directions in which Polish people went, how many went this way, how many went that way, for what reasons. But above all, we wanted to restore their stories. Because when Polish people left Poland, they left with their biographies, their life stories, the stories of their immigration. And there was a void left that could not be filled with historical research, with statistics or memorabilia. We believe that this void could be only filled and explained in a story told by immigrants themselves. Okay, so that's our site. And I myself specifically work at the Oral History Archive. We call it Emigrants Archive, where we work in a great tradition of oral history. It's a it's a way of obtaining historical information simply by talking to people, and I think that memory and emotions were sadly omitted by historians for many, many decades, and in oral history we want to retrieve those emotions, as we believe they are basically the essence of our lives. As we see today, probably all of us experience some kind of historical event, whether it be the history of our grandparents during the Second World War or the access to the European Union. And we all have recollections what we were talking about during this event, whom we called, or even what we were wearing. And all those informations are tchotchkes for professional historians. And what tchotchke is? Tchotchke is basically this pretty little thing, usually made of porcelain, that in Poland we put on windowsills, and it has basically no purpose other than being cute and collect dust. And I myself am the most interested in tchotchke because, as I said, the emotions, what we are feeling, are the essence of our lives, and they basically constitute, you know, these grand historic narratives that we are discussing in textbooks. And okay. Back to 2012 when we established our museum. At the same time, we established a net of researchers from all around the world that would conduct interviews, in-depth interviews with our immigrants. We have them in United States, Canada, Australia, Argentina, Brazil, China, you name it. At the same time, we were conducting interviews in Poland, of course. And soon we've gathered a collection of over 400 interviews, both audio and video, that amounted to about 1,000 hours of audio recordings. And that's quite a long story of immigration. We've decided to create a second site dedicated especially to oral history project done in our museum. As you can see on the screen, this is it. We try to put every interview we conduct on our site. We add a short biography of our witness of history, his pictures, of course the excerpts of the interviews that usually last from 1 to even 5 hours. And I won't describe our internet site because, you know, that's a cute internet site. I'd rather show you the example of our interviews. We try to be as little invasive with questions as possible. I want my interviewee to create his or her own narrative about his life, because I believe that the story of immigration could only be told in the own words of immigrants themselves. And this video I want to show you is kind of particular. It's kind of a trailer of what we are doing in Emigrants Archive. It's a little bit different. It has the highlights of certain answers our immigrant Agnieszka Imbirowicz gave us, so that our audience will get the impression, will get the vibe of what we are talking about during our interviews. So let's take a look. Will it work? Okay, that's not a big deal. If it's not possible, maybe we will show it later. But, you know, it's an example of our work, 3-minute clip that we showed to our audience right before the museum has opened, and it serves to this day to show our audience what we are doing in Oral History Archive. And going beyond Emigrants Archive, besides doing interviews and try to be as good at it as possible, we also try to engage those long interviews in some other projects that I want to talk to you about. Ask about Poland workshops. In the beginning, I've told you shortly of the methodology, the technicalities of oral history interview. And the going behind the scenes and the whole process of meeting a new person, of meeting an immigrant and establishing a connection with it is for me very interesting enough to be showcased as a separate project. And in 2015 we've introduced re-emigrants to our archive, people that after emigration, after several years or decades, decided to come back to Poland. And we were curious because various research showed that coming back to your homeland is not simply coming back to what you left. It's basically a different, new kind of emigration to a place that changed during our absence. And we've also, during the emigration, changed ourselves. So we've invited several re-emigrants and decided to come back to Poland. And a first meeting consisted of group discussions where we've wanted to establish a safe space for our emigrants to share their life stories, the stories of their emigration. And in a way, they've resembled group therapy meetings, but I want to underline that we did not provide any psychological help, although oral history method is very similar, sometimes can be to psychotherapy, narrative psychotherapy. First meeting consisted of talking to each and every one of them. And in the process, we've noticed that re-emigrants really understood themselves best. So as a crew of Emigrants Archive, we've decided not to conduct interviews ourselves, but rather give initiative to our witnesses of history, as we call them. So we paired them up. They've interviewed themselves in their safe spaces in Gdynia, their flats, favorite places in town, and as a result, we've gained a collection of very interesting interviews where we heard questions that we as a, let's say, professional listeners, trained historians, oral historians, that we would never thought about. And this project taught us that being rather a witness than a scriptwriter can give you very interesting, very fruitful results, and trusting the process. And case of lost audio cassettes, that's kind of new. And last summer, last June to be exact, I've received an email from a man that found audio cassettes in dumpster in Wrocław. It's a city in the south of Poland. And he thought that it would be a great addition to our collection because on these audio cassettes, a Polish immigrant from Australia recorded his letters to his beloved woman that was still in Poland. And on these cassettes, he discussed how he was homesick, his struggles with work, and what he's planning to do. And for me, it was very interesting for four reasons. First of all, it was the oral history in this purest, rawest form possible, because it was basically the oral history in the making by immigrants themselves. Second of all, the audio cassettes, the taping of letters on audio cassettes isn't a rarity for Polish immigrants from 80s, 90s, sometimes 70s. They oftentimes, rather than writing down their letter, they've just recorded it. Third reason is that it would be an interesting, of course, addition to our collection. And back then, I was thinking about this exhibition of oral history, of oral history. And for many reasons, we could not use this, just obtain it to our collection. We had to fulfill some law requirements. So I thought about just placing the ad in the local newspapers, both in Poland and in Australia, stating that Museum of Immigration is looking for such and such person. And long story short, we ended up in national television, in main news release, and for 1.5 days, Poland was looking for this immigrant, which was very surprising to me, because it really came from a place of genuine interest and wanting to find this person. Unfortunately, it wasn't found. He either died, that would explain why his audio tapes were found in the dumpster, or he noticed our ad in newspaper. I thought about this crazy lady from Immigration Museum that's invading his privacy. But for the second time, it proved to us that what is most interesting for our audience are not grand historical narratives, but small stories that would engage them and with which they could empathize. And Children of Pachiatua. I don't know if any of you or any of the Polish team knows about the history of Polish children during the Second World War. I believe no one knows, because it's a... okay, Ania knows, but... okay. It's merely a footnote in Polish historical handbooks, and I want you to briefly, I will explain to you. I don't know if you can see it. Okay, it's a little bit small, but in the beginning of Second World War, Polish people were forcefully displaced to USSR, where they were living mainly in Siberia. They were forced to live there, they couldn't leave. They were forced to work, and it was able for them to come back to Poland or to simply leave USSR in the middle of 1941. The majority of them joined Polish army, which traveled from USSR to Middle East, mainly to Iran. They stayed there for around 2 years, where International Red Cross helped them and gave them necessities, medical help, and financing. And back then, in 1943, a wonderful thing happened, because some of the countries offered their help, offered Polish people stuck in the Middle East help during the wartime. Just to name a few, Uganda, Mexico, India, and New Zealand. And one transportation from Iran took place to New Zealand's Pachiatua, which is a small city next to Wellington. And we've acquired several interviews from people that were living there, that decided to stay there, because it was a transportation of about 700 children and over 100 adult people. And after the Second World War ended, only 50 Polish people came back to Poland. And we've acquired several interviews with now elder people from Pachiatua. They were usually 80 or 19 years old. And when they were talking about their experience of 2 years in USSR, then Middle East, then coming back to New Zealand and choosing it as their new homeland. They were basically kids, although they were at that time 80 or 90 years old people. And it was very moving, mainly because of that New Zealanders really provided them a real house, real home. Some of New Zealand's families decided to adopt Polish people and treated them as part of family, and they provided them with the most regular childhood in the most irregular of times of Second World War. And it was very important to me because, as probably all of you know, right now the topic of war migration, the refugees, is very much politicized, especially in Poland. And so I wanted by this collection showcase that we as Polish people were once refugees ourselves, and this country, New Zealand, really welcomed us, and it was very moving. After the launch of this collection, that was systematically acquired throughout last years, we got to premiere it on our site in the February of 2018, and it met wonderful response. People were very interested in this episode of Polish history, and I thought about, while preparing for this presentation, that this was really an example of how to deliver intangible heritage and how to educate people that in Poland that we had this episode of being refugees ourselves. And past states, I think that every oral history archive has this thought sooner or later about creating a short documentary thanks to these these hours of acquired interviews. And since 2014, we were conducting interviews in Greenpoint. It's a neighborhood of New York. And since the 19th century, it was known because there was an influx of Polish people there. There were Polish grocery stores everywhere, Polish churches, Polish bank services, transportation services, you name it. And New Yorkers, native New Yorkers, even called Greenpoint as a little Poland. And if you wanted to get a job there, you had to learn a few of Polish words because you usually got a job from a Polish person. And by conducting this interview since 2014 with cooperation with the Culture Shock Foundation, we've noticed that there is less and less Polish people there. The Polish community shrinks, and probably in the next few decades, if not years, the Polish people will probably disappear from Greenpoint. And we wanted to capture this last moment of Polish presence there because Poles definitely shaped the history and the culture of New York's Greenpoint. We've choose two protagonists of this movie. Martynka Wawrzyniak, which you could see on the left, and she's an artist. She was starting to creating this artistic project whose aim is also to commemorate Polish presence in Greenpoint. And she was meeting with various long-term Greenpoint Polish inhabitants. She met Mrs. Helena, which emigrated to United States in 70s. And while Martynka, while listening to Mrs. Helena's story, opened up herself, and they confronted their stories, and they came to this conclusion that although they are missing Poland, they chose Greenpoint because it's in very ways it reminded them of Poland. They did not decide to come back to Poland. So I just want to show you a short trailer of our movie, which premiered last week. And by doing so, thank you very much for listening to what I said. Could we play the movie? Okay, guys, for anyone interested, I will send you a link. Thank you very much.